Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Northumberland Coast AONB Annual Forum 2022. I'm Patrick Norris and I chair the AONB Partnership. And we have a packed agenda this afternoon, some great speakers and a good question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions, have any urgent questions, we'll try and take them, but otherwise there'll be a nice long Q&A session after cake at 3 o'clock. Usual housekeeping things. There are, I've been advised there are no fire alarms being tested today, so if you hear a fire alarm, exits around you, please leave the building. And the toilets are at the back by the entrance where you came in. And I've been asked by Mark about cups. We need to get the cups washed for tea and coffee at 3 o'clock, so we'll try and pick up the cups as and when we can. They've got a dishwasher, so that'll all be nice and done, ready for our tea at 3 o'clock. It's been a busy year for the AONB, and Ian will update us on what's been happening, and Chris Woodley-Stewart, who is the vice chair of the National Association of AONBs, is also here to update us on some of the national picture and events like that. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to reflect on the work of the AONB over the last 12 months. And then we'll have our first guest speaker on completion of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. It was just to say as well, we are filming this event, but it'll just be the speakers that are filmed. We'll probably film the question and answer session. If you don't want to be on the screen and be on YouTube as stars, just let us know. Or just don't ask a question. Ask us at the end, something like that. As Patrick said, my name is Ian Robson. I have the pleasure of managing the Northumberland Coast AONB, the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Partnership, and the staff team. And I've been the manager here since January 21, so coming up on 2 years. Make sure that works. So this is an old photograph. You've seen this one before. We haven't been together as a team somewhere nice and sunny to renew this photograph. So there's quite a few changes since this photograph was taken. So this time last year, Mark Middleton joined us as a farming and wildlife nature recovery officer. So Mark looks after our farming and protected landscapes programme, which you'll hear more about in a minute. Sadly, after our annual forum last year, Jessica Turner left the organisation. Those that know Jessica, she was absolutely brilliant, absolutely gutted to lose her. She went off to the Forestry Commission of all places, but back to hardcore historic environment, which is the thing that she really loves. That gave us an opportunity, and Sarah, who's peering at us from behind, from the window upstairs, controlling the technology, Sarah, that enabled us to make Sarah permanent, which is brilliant. Sarah brings loads of experience, loads of enthusiasm, and is a really brilliant addition to the team. So following that, we were kind of nearly up to strength. Obviously, Mark Fennell joined us before last year's forum. We're delighted that Teresa Glynn is joining us on Monday. Teresa's here somewhere. She wants to give us a wave. Somewhere. There's Teresa. So Teresa's joining us on Monday with an administration and finance role. So supporting Mark through the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme, but generally giving us support to the team. And finally, on the 3rd of January, we've got Kaylee Elcock joining us as a communications officer. So those roles are both to replace Catherine Gray. So Catherine was with the team for 16 years, and she left in the summer to think about things new, and she's still pondering that. But again, Catherine, brilliant member of the team, and we were very sad to lose Catherine. So some comings and goings, but hopefully the team's quite settled now, and we'll get a new photograph taken, I promise, for next time. Just check that. So just going to run through some of the bigger projects, bigger pieces of work that we've been doing over the last year or so. Big projects for us anyway. The visitor parking and travel strategy. This came around through the coastal summits that Northumberland County Council organised, but it was an issue that was with us before that. Building up over certainly the last 10 years or so, with the increase in number of visitors to the Northumberland coast, but more importantly, the increase in the number of cars. The percentage is around about 95% of our visitors arrive by car, and with the number of visitors going up exponentially, that was becoming an issue. COVID brought it to a head. We had the lockdown ended, and everyone and their dog and everyone in their car came to the Northumberland coast, it felt like. And it caused big problems with local communities, it caused problems with business people, farmers, just a huge, huge issue. And it was the loudest voice, if you like, from the local communities, parish councillors. This was something we had to do something about. So we were tasked to come up with a strategy to deal with this issue. So we employed a company called Martin Higginson Associates. They've been working for us for the last year or so on a two-part process. The first part funded by DEFRA, the second part funded by Northumberland County Council, and we now have a draft strategy in place. It's about to go through the kind of big cheeses in Northumberland County Council who are going to be responsible for implementing a lot of this. We had a really good meeting with County Council staff last week, and we're on track to try and get this implemented. It's a huge piece of work. It's going to require quite significant change in the local authority in terms of their policies. Good. So it advocates for a sustainable tourism model, which reduces the impact of cars on people's lives. So the impact on people's lives, the impact on communities, the impact on the landscape, direct impact on the landscape. When we started this process, there was at least 9, maybe 10 proposed car parks in the pipeline, so new car parks in the A1B. So that's a direct impact on the landscape, and that was something that we had to resolve and had to try and tackle. So this will take that, as I say, sustainable tourism approach. It'll improve people's lives. It'll increase visitor spend, and it'll guide our management plan policy in terms of things like development. So if a development's taking place and it requires lots of new car parks, that's not a sustainable development, and that will help guide our management plan policy in the future. When we review the plan in 2024. And the next steps, as I say, are to get this through the County Council. There's a glorious slide of lots of urbanising clutter. You might recognise some of this, those of you that live locally. This kind of creeping urbanisation is something that was picked up on our last management plan. It impacts directly on the landscape, it impacts directly on things like tranquility. And it's just like a constant creep of stuff, urbanised stuff that you would expect to see in Cramlington, not necessarily on the Northumberland coast. So we previously had a highways design guide, rural roads guidance. It was produced in 2011. It needed a review. So with some DEFRA money from last year, we undertook a review of that with a company called Phil Jones Associates, and they've been working over the last kind of 6 months or so to review that. So they've taken a quite a nice approach, thinking about the user, the reader of this, highways engineers in the whole, local services, that kind of thing, but also parish councils and parish councillors who often demand some of this urbanising clutter that appears in the countryside. So here's some screenshots. It's usable, it's readable, it appeals to highways engineers, it talks their language, it has policies, it has designers' notes, and we think it's going to be a really usable document for everyone. It's at final draft, and we're going to run that through the County Council over the next 2 months or so, and should be available for public consumption by January. That's just another screenshot. That's our Verge guidance. So it gives you an idea of the type of guidance that we'll do. Our other big project, which actually came to an end recently, was the Bamborough Bones project, accessing Aden. No doubt you'll all have heard of this. Jessica's talked about it a lot. You've probably heard her speak. She's on tour still as a volunteer. Even though she's left us, she still worked on the Bamborough Bones project for the last year or so. So it ran from April 2019 until October 2012. It's funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. It's a partnership project with ourselves, the PCC at Bamborough, and the Bamborough Heritage Trust, amongst others. It created new access. It created the world's first digital ossuary, which is great, a world first, here on the Northumberland coast. We had pies, we had plays, we had poetry, we had a final hurrah, and just a really, really good partnership project. Highlights of this year, 2022, we've developed the Key Stage 2 offer, so more and more school groups. Sarah's been training volunteers who, some of them are here, I guess, who are going to lead the school groups to the future through the Bamborough Bones experience. So that's the kind of legacy of it all. Oh, I don't know, can we turn some lights down? That would be brilliant. Ah, there we go. So, yeah, that's the legacy. And we won the Boland Award, which is recognises national best practice in AO&Bs. And we went down to the conference in Lancaster, and we ccame away with the award. So it's now sat in my house waiting to be engraved, because we haven't got an office to put it in. Shame. But I have to thank Jessica. She really was her project from the start to finish. She's still invested in it, and it's been a wonderful project. But I also have to thank Catherine, who helped with that project, and now Sarah, who's picked that up. Absolutely fantastic project. I can't read my notes now, John. It's too dark. What are we on? Coastlands. So this is a little bit of bad news, actually, but not all bad news. So we submitted Coastlands. It's a project we've talked to many of you about. We submitted it to the Heritage Lottery Fund in the summer, and we heard back just last week that we'd been unsuccessful with that bid. It was for a £3.2 million ask of the Heritage Lottery Fund, or National Lottery Heritage Fund as they are now, for a £4.1 million project. We invested a huge amount of time in this. We used some of our DEFRA money and employed the brilliant Catherine Williams, who's here, fundraising consultant extraordinaire, and so we invested a lot of time. We talked to a lot of projects, a lot of partners. It was a really good bid, but unfortunately, we didn't get funded on this occasion. The competition was tough, and there was a lot of unknowns. A lot of the unknowns were out of our hands, like what is the government's future farming policy at that time? We didn't know. Everything was in the air, and we had a lot of match funding pinned into things like ELM schemes in the future. We were encouraged by HLF to, in the National Lottery Heritage Fund, to resubmit. They liked the project, and they really encouraged us to resubmit, which we will in either February or May. This is an awful photograph. It's me looking even more miserable than I usually do. I'm going to blame Sarah for this one. She had at least 300 photographs to choose from, and she chose this one. What can I say? We need to get a photographer, I think maybe. But it was Patrick's sister took this. But it was a cold day, wasn't it, Patrick? We all looked miserable because it was so cold. So this was some of the other big bits of work that we've done over the year. This is national work. All 34 AO&Bs through the National Association, 34 English and the Welsh AO&Bs. Sorry, no, it's just English AO&Bs because it's Historic England. We did a joint statement reconfirming our relationship with Historic England, and we were lucky enough to launch that at Bamborough. It was something that Jessica led on, Sarah picked up with the National Association for AO&Bs. The more mundane day-to-day stuff, we responded to 108 planning applications, and it's fair to say most of them were related to tourism in some way or another. Huge potential impact on the AO&B, huge amount of work from particularly Sarah, dealing with the planning workload that we have. And we are expected by the local authority to respond to every single application that comes in, and it's a big piece of work. Mark Middleton has been working on our nature recovery plan, and that's starting to take some shape, and hopefully we'll have a draft by April of that. And finally, just to say working together, you know, the day-to-day work of the AO&B partnership is that, it's partnership, and it takes a lot of work to work with all of the organisations that we work with on the Northumberland coast and wider. And we're a small team of 4 at the moment, so you can imagine a lot of our time is just spent on that day-to-day advocacy. Coast Care, what a success. Absolutely fantastic. Started off as an HLF project until 2021. Mark Fennell came in, he's waving from the back, came in and just picked it up and ran with it. I think we've got about 20 of our Coast Care volunteers here today, and I'm sure you'll all agree with me that Mark has been absolutely wonderful as a project leader and manager. It's his expert and guidance and enthusiasm that really is the strength behind Coast Care. We've now got 117 volunteers on the books, and absolutely invaluable. The work that the team do is absolutely incredible. Mark's managed to recruit and train 7 leaders to help him out. So we've got, while he's leading one thing, we've got leaders leading something else somewhere else. Absolutely brilliant. Couldn't do it without you. 6,000 hours plus this year alone, and can't say too enough about Coastguard. It's fantastic. Good example of a project we've been involved with is funded through our Farming and Protected Landscapes programme. Our barn owl project, creating some enormous barn owl sheds in places. Phil was wildly enthusiastic about the size of these things. You can see them from space. But we're going to build over 3 years, build 6 bespoke barn owl sheds and put up 27 barn owl boxes in the A1B in that time. We had a talk to some farmers this morning with Ben. Ben mentioned putting boxes up, and Mark was inundated with farmers wanting to put more tawny owl boxes up to kill rats, so that's good. We'll be doing some of that. There's nothing they won't do, our volunteers. Hedges, beach cleans, dry stone wall and access work, public rights of way. There's absolutely nothing they won't do. And it really is partnership in action. So we talk about working in partnership. This is partnership working for real. There's just a list of some of the partners that we've worked with just this year alone. We've also established a CIO, a charitable incorporated organisation. So Coastguard is now a charity. We've got 3 trustees, and they're now starting to raise money to help pay for Coastguard. DEFRA don't pay for this kind of stuff, so our core grant doesn't cover Coastguard. It doesn't cover Mark's salary, although it is at the moment. But we're going to have to bring in money to do this kind of thing. It doesn't fund itself. There isn't core budget for this. So we have to work as a charity to do that. Farming and Protected Landscapes is a big piece of work for us. We're in year 2 now of a 3-year Farming and Protected Landscapes programme, which was negotiated by Chris and colleagues at the National Association with DEFRA. It's DEFRA farming money. Year 1 went really well. Slight underspend, not our fault, just farmers not doing what they said they would do, but really brilliant opportunity to engage meaningfully with farmers. For the first time, it allowed us to take on Mark to work with farmers, and it's been a real success. Year 2 of that, Mark's now got a good crop of projects coming through for all sorts of things: ponds, orchards, hedges, the barn owl project, just a real good mix of projects. This is a photograph of Embleton Quarry House, which is not on a farm, but it's in a nature reserve, and we've managed to restore that to keep it safe and provide opportunities for tree sparrows. So all good. A little bit of national stuff. I'll not steal Chris's thunder because I know he'll mention some of the national stuff, but we're part of the National Association for Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty. Brilliant team centrally who support the work we do and provide a great link through to DEFRA. But you might remember this, the Glover Review, the Landscape Review. So 2018, it was first commissioned. Seems like a long time ago. It was published in September 19. Julian Glover and his team went around, spent a year pulling that together, published in September 19 with 27 proposals. Proposal 24 was the most important one for us, where AONBs are strengthened, their purposes, powers and resources, and renamed as national landscapes. None of that's happened yet, but we're working towards it, hopefully. The government responded in part in January this year, but it was part response, part consultation, and haven't responded fully yet, but I'm sure Chris will touch on that. The National Association have set out a prospectus. They've given this prospectus to DEFRA, recognising this opportunity of a renaming of AONBs as national landscapes as an opportunity for us as AONBs to deliver the government's big ideas. And I like this, is convene, enable and deliver. And I think hopefully from what I've told you about the work of the team this year, you'll see that that's exactly what we do now. We convene, we get people together, we enable people to do things, we enable farmers to do things, and we deliver on the ground through the likes of Coastguard. There's only 4 of us in the team, as I said, so I think we've done an awful lot. I'm sure you agree. Looking forward to completing the team in January and having a full team. We've got a highways and buildings design guide. We hope then to deliver training to whoever we need to train on those. Deliver the visitor travel strategy to deal with our sustainable tourism issues. Year 2 of FIPL, the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme. Hopefully Coastguard will go strength to strength to strength. We're going to work with communities and we're going to talk about carbon. We've got nature recovery planning and some species work that we're going to be doing. And finally, we need to resubmit coastlands early in the new year. So that brings me to a close. I couldn't do it without the team. It's a team effort, and I would really like to thank the team on behalf of the partnership and Patrick, our chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I often sit in events like this and at the various meetings we hold in astonishment at what Ian and the team put together. I've been in Northumberland, living here for 12 years now, and I've always kept a close in touch with the AONB and the work that they do, and I think it's astonishing. And then when you look at the bigger picture, we're one of 34 AONBs. So you add it all up across the country, there's an astonishing amount of work being done, which covers many of the aspects of what Ian has talked about today. So thank you, Ian, and thank you for the team. It's great to see. So our keynote speaker today is Benedict MacDonald. And Ben is a lifelong naturalist and now works as a conservationist transforming landscapes back to nature for the Real Wild Estates Company. He's an award-winning author. His first book, Rebirding, outlined how we can transform both the farming and wilderness areas in the country for wildlife, for people, and so on. So Ben, I'd like to invite you to come down and give your presentation. We're very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Lovely to see such a full turnout. Thank you for the introduction. So yes, I am Ben MacDonald, Benedict. I now work in nature restoration as a business where we help landowners, farmers, farm clusters to not exactly turn back the clock, but turn the clock forwards to a time of much greater ecosystem abundance and biodiversity. And it's an interesting point, I suppose, to begin when we talk about beauty, outstanding areas of outstanding natural beauty. I mean, there is a compelling argument that although we may all find the play of light on a set of heavily grazed fields beautiful, and the Lake District is undeniably beautiful, is it natural? And I think the honest answer is it isn't, but that doesn't mean that it can't be beautiful. Now, perceptions of beauty are very interesting because they inform conservation. I find a scrub landscape filled with birdsong and nightingales extraordinarily beautiful. It's also functional. It's full of life. It's sequestering carbon. It's full of hedgehogs. It's full of life. A lot of people find scrub offensive, messy, scruffy. Get rid of it. Let's have the nice, neat hedges. And of course, a lot of the work that I do within AONBs is not simply about recovering wildlife, but it's about shifting people's cultural perceptions of what beauty is. 100 years ago, every farm in the UK was fuzzy and scruffy, and the farmers would have been very proud of that farm. Well, today, many of our farmers are very tidy, fields are very neat. The British countryside is always given this short back and sides to its hedgerows, with considerable adverse impacts on our biodiversity. We are the neatest country in Europe, and we also have the worst wildlife and the worst rates of wildlife decline, which continue to this day. But I think with the AONBs, there's an extraordinary opportunity to shift people's perceptions of what should be there. Now, of course, most AONBs started off as areas of low housing development, where we wanted to keep things that way. The landscapes had great cultural value, and it's not a dissimilar situation with our national parks. They were designated in this country as cultural preservation landscapes, which is good if you're a part of that particular farming culture, but not particularly good necessarily if you're trying to restore that landscape to a state of greater biodiversity. So how do we balance the cultural elements of protecting this extraordinary AONB and its cultural history with the fact that Northumberland, like any other county in Britain, has seen over the last 100 years a catastrophic loss of its curlews, of its corncrakes. Whole species like redback shrikes and wrynecks that used to breed here are no longer breeding anywhere in the British Isles. Turtle doves, grey partridges in a fraction of the numbers that they used to be. So when I sort of studied the British countryside across, well, all of my life really, but when I was writing Rebirding from 2014 to 19, it's very interesting that a lot of people have become the victim of shifting baseline syndrome, where you accept the current landscape as being optimal, beautiful, when in fact even 100 years ago it would have looked much scruffier, messier, and it would have been considerably more full of life. The hedges, the fuzzy fields, the iris beds with the undrained bits of fields with the redshanks and the corncrakes that are now driven to the Outer Hebrides and virtually absent from the landscape. But I think, there are amazing opportunities to use AONBs as areas where we shift people's perceptions and say, well, this is always going to be a beautiful landscape anyway. It's always going to be cared for passionately by its people, but we need to be creating and recreating sort of an ecosystem function within that landscape, and that's partly a mindset. But in terms of how do you reverse nature recovery, let's firstly look at what's happened over the last 100 years. And I wrote about this in Rebirding in a series of things that have happened to the British countryside to a greater degree than they've happened to even Western Europe, and particularly the East European countryside, where you can still wake up in the morning thinking that you're next to a motorway before realizing that you're hearing the sound of bees, where there are still 20 to 30 pairs of nightingale in a village and 200 pairs of swallow. An extraordinary bioabundance that we once had in this country in my grandfather's time, and would have been more abundant again in my great-grandfather's time. But we have seen, really since the enclosure of farmland from the early 1800s, by all indicators, a 200-year decline in our wildlife. People always talk about the 70s. That's when the first bird atlas was written. We began to study the level of decline. But of course, by the 1970s, we'd already lost most of our corncrakes, all of our wrynecks, most of our redback shrikes. So the decline of wildlife in this country has been going on a very long time. This talk will get cheerful soon, but we have to explain a little bit about what's happened, as I see it at least. Fundamentally, we have taken out the ecosystem from the bottom up, especially in the last 50 years. Insect bioabundance powers cuckoos, nightingales, swallows. These are all insectivorous species. And we have de-weeded and tidied the countryside to the nth degree. We have also created some very hard-edged landscapes. There's some beautiful areas of Northumberland with birch, soft-edged, wonderful grassy sand dunes, incredible coastal salt marshes. There are also some very hard-edged habitats of Sitka spruce, of overgrazing, of overburning that are simplifying the landscape. So I think it's important when we think about an AONB, I'd say to all of you, think about, make sure you're enshrining the right things. But a landscape is never static, just like human history does not stay still. I suppose have some concerns that we enshrine by mistake the wrong things. We enshrine the tidy fields, the neat hedges. We enshrine the overly driven grouse moors. We enshrine issues that come from intensive practice, like surface runoff, downstream flooding. And anything like a beaver, for example, is seen as a sort of radical departure from what the landscape should be, because it's what we've grown up with. But of course, what we grow up with changes all the time. When I was small, there was this thing called dial-up internet that didn't really work. It just made bleeping noises. And now here we are on our phones. So I see nature restoration as the same. We started this business less than 2 years ago. We now manage over 20,000 acres of land. And we have quite conservative landowners saying, please, can we have some beavers? And we say, well, we'll try our best. So, and we're seeing farmers in Essex farming beavers to keep water on the land so they can feed their livestock in summer, or rather water their livestock come drought. So the times are changing very quickly, and I think our perception as a country is slowly changing from thinking that the neat, orderly British countryside is ideal to thinking, gosh, it's awfully quiet. We can't hear the birds that we used to. We can't hear the bees that we used to. That we have, taken out the food chain from the bottom up. And when I was talking about with a fantastic cluster of farmer landowners this morning, this is all recoverable quite easily, actually, by rebuilding food chains from the bottom up. And I think AONBs can play an incredibly important role in doing just that. If we can start to restore the weedy bits, the scruffy bits, the margins, the hedgerows, if we can stop over-tidying our park environments, our country parks, if our councils can stop using glyphosate and stop tidying and spraying public areas, which is certainly in southern England is a major problem, you'll begin to see a vast amount of incremental invertebrate recovery just by being scruffier and doing less. Doing less is doing, often for nature, is doing more. It's interesting when a lot of people have gone down to the Knepp Estate project, the most famous ecosystem restoration or rewilding, as some people call it, in southern England. The knee-jerk reaction is, oh gosh, it looks awfully scruffy. All this bramble is getting away. But then, of course, when you wake up in the morning and you hear, 20 to 30 nightingales all competing with one another, really, it's just like the rest of the countryside was 100 years ago. But none of us in this room were 100, so we've forgotten quite how loud with birds the countryside used to be. I see AONBs as a powerful vehicle, not of enshrining the current landscape, but preserving the best of the current landscape whilst retaining great ambition for what that landscape could be like in the future. So what might that landscape look like in this part of the world? Well, I would love to see grouse moors feathered with birches and willows like we see more of in areas of Scotland, with lots more black grouse. Smaller bag shooting that allows for a more diverse landscape, where instead of sort of farming that landscape for red grouse, it's a more diverse wooded landscape. I would love to see big, thick, impenetrable hedgerows that are much better for bullfinches, lesser whitethroats, tree sparrows. More of a acceptance that scrub, as we call it, although I think it needs to be renamed, maybe shrubland, is extraordinarily beneficial for the vast majority of the small songbirds that everyone says that they love, and yet often are tidied out of our gardens, our parks, and our farm edges. Wetland creation is already very much well in hand in this part of the world, but a lot of the British countryside has become incredibly dry due to the combined drainage of moorland and farmland. So I think a landscape can remain outstandingly beautiful and become more and more natural over time to the benefit of all the residents living within the AONB. But at the same time, the conservative functions of the AONB, preventing anything from an insensitive sign to an insensitive development, I think is incredibly important and something that we should all be very grateful for. So, in terms of ecosystem reconstruction, which is what I do for a living now, it's always a lot harder to put life back than protect life. It's relatively easy if you've got a seabird colony to put up some signs, fence it off, and protect it. It doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile. But often what we're looking at is the fundamental cultural question of what should be there. If you're a lifelong sheep farmer, what should be there is sheep. But if you've just bought the landscape and you're my age, and you are very climate aware, then you might say what should be there should be trees. Well, we can probably do both. I mean, wood pasture, for example, combines trees with sheep. There are many types of landscape that we used to have here in the British Isles that you can see in the paintings of Constable or Gainsborough, wood pasture landscapes, lightly grazed woodlands with cattle under oak. All of these integrated systems create much better biodiversity than hard-edged systems where you have Sitka, sheep, and grouse. And I think soft edging the Northumbrian landscape and the AONB, whenever anyone does this, public perception is very positive. When I show people a picture of a moor that is simply heather with burnt patches, and a similar moor, topographically speaking, not covered, but studded with a sea of birch, maybe interspersed with some light grazing, the general reaction of the public is they prefer deciduous trees to conifers. They prefer trees to no trees. But there is also a sense that there should be a place for the open landscape. People don't like the idea that all of our moorland and our heritage is just going to vanish under a sea of trees. That the George Monbiot's school of ecological reconstruction tends to be a lot less popular. A lot of what we do is try and resolve these false dichotomies by integrating these elements, grazing, woodland, shrubland, wetland, into the same landscape. And we actually make that financially viable for farmers and landowners. The more types of product, economic product, coming out of a landscape, the more secure your land holding as a farmer is. The same goes for any other form of investment, of course. If you're investing money in stocks and shares, you should also invest some in non-stocks and shares and cash and so on. So often when we work with landowners, there is a traditional view that the land is just there to produce a yield of meat or timber. Well, these days, land can also produce a yield of wetland carbon and woodland carbon biodiversity. We're seeing biodiversity credits coming down the road that will pay and monetize biodiversity. Now, somebody like me, biodiversity and beauty have an innate value. However, we also need to make the countryside profitable or at least viable for those who farm and manage the land. Otherwise, the alternative is rural collapse, land abandonment, and quite poor biodiversity. One thing I've learned in all my time managing land thus far is biodiversity loves light disturbance. So cattle browsing a woodland, pigs rootling in a field can be very beneficial. The next year you find all kinds of wonderful plants have popped up. And of course the countryside used to be gazillions of very small farms or contributing towards a picture of overall biodiversity and particularly bioabundance. What we've seen is a great degree of landscape simplification, but I think through an instrument like the AONB, anyone and everyone, big landowner or small, can play their part in slowly returning variety, heterogeneity as I call it, to the landscape. If we get the small-scale variety right, then we can build up a picture that is still beautiful, but in my view is even more natural and outstandingly natural than it is at the moment. Thank you. I wasn't sure. Are we doing questions now, or do you want to go to the...
Questions after the next two talks.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I say, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session today. So I'll introduce our next guest speaker, Claire Freeman, who is the Director of the Natural History Society of Northumbria. And she's spent the last 25 years working with landowners, farmers, community groups, schools and committed individuals, and is bringing people and wildlife together that she's especially enthusiastic about. Oh, it's Heather. Oh, okay, right, okay. See, I tried to print the agenda, but my printer is broken, so it's kind of, yeah. So I'll take a step back. So Heather DeVay is co-director of Wild Intrigue, and some of you may have come across the work that they do, a northeast-based community interest company. Devoted to finding fresh ways to inspire, educate and rewild in Northern England. And this has included events like Bats and Pizzas, and to Newcastle's first Tyne Kittiwake Week. So Heather, if you want to come down to the front, and I apologise for getting in the wrong order. I need an agenda, certainly. Thank you very much.
Benedict was always going to be a bit of a tough act to follow, but I'll try. So I'm Heather Devey. I'm the founder and co-director of Wild Intrigue, so we've been running for about 8 years or so now. And when Ian asked me to give a bit of a talk today, I thought, how on earth can we fit in everything that we do in 20 minutes? So I'm really going to try, and I've brought my phone, not to text my mates, but so that I keep on track, because I do get a bit passionate talking about particular topics. So everything that we do, we try and bring people on a journey of nature discovery and a journey of people as well, en route. So I've kind of tried to do this talk a little bit like that. So a couple of weeks ago, I hosted a Dark Skies and Creatures of the Night event with the Northumberland National Park. And as soon as I got there, a little girl ran up to me and said, "I want you to show me some wildcats and bears." And I said, well, we're walking in the footsteps of bears and, we're walking in the footsteps of wildcats. We might see a bat. And I just thought, imagine if we could show her some of these things, because it's not just this little girl who believes there's still bears and wildcats and wolves and all these amazing creatures and beavers in the woodlands. It's adults as well. So actually a lot of our events, we get asked, are we going to bump into any wolves? Should I bring some repellent with us? It's like, no, you're all right. It's okay. Don't worry about that this time. Maybe next time. But we really love that because it's the perception that people have of the countryside. They think that it is this wild place, and it would be lovely to kind of help reinstate some of that in reality as well. So when Wild Intrigue first got set up, or when I first set it up, although I knew that we didn't have wolves and bears and things, we'd go out in search of this wildness ourselves. We'd try and rewild ourselves, I suppose. So we'd go to the far-reaching places of Scotland, the Isle of Carna, which is a beautiful island of restoration. We'd go to the Banff Estate that have had beavers for over 20 years, all these different places to rewild ourselves. And eventually we ended up bringing people along on the journey. So we hosted what we called expeditions, and people would pay and come and learn camera trapping and bat detecting and moth trapping and all this amazing stuff. And it was really wonderful. This is the Isle of Carna, this one. It was really wonderful. But what we realised is the people booking on were like all of us in the room, really. They already had this level of connection with nature. They already had a bit of an understanding of it. And we wanted to reach out to audiences who kind of get a little bit left behind, I suppose. So the early 20s up to the mid 40s, people who just don't even think of going out into nature as enjoyable, particularly when there's midges, I should say. So we thought, well, everyone likes pizza, right? How can we lure these people out? Pizza. Who doesn't like pizza? No one put your hands up. So we thought, right, well, people love pizza. We want to get them out engaging with the species that we think are really cool, like bats. So we launched our first Bats and Pizza Night, which ended up being a mini exped, as we called them. And it sounds a little bit cute and a little bit gimmicky, but there's real heart to it. So the purpose of them is people come along, they have this alfresco dining experience, we go out on a bat safari, we have the campfire, all of that stuff. And we've been running these for about 7 years, I think now. I've lost all track, but about 7 years. And it remains kind of the golden child of Wild Intrigue. Apparently, the tickets are as hard to get as Fenwick's Christmas Santa on the rooftop. So get your tickets while you can. So from that point, we tried to extend our offer because we were both working, I say we, it's me and my partner, Kane Scrimger, who run this. So while it was setting up, we were both working full time. So we just had to do it on evenings and weekends. So we thought, well, instead of running these expeditions and engaging with people who already understand nature, we wanted to get this new audience out. So we thought, well, we'll develop our series of mini expeds. And now we've got about 13 to 15 mini expeds across Northern England. Because Northern England is this incredible hub that gets forgotten about. We've got some brilliant wildlife. We do need nature restoration, but we've got some incredible wildlife and some absolutely lush people that we really want to celebrate. So we linked up with various organisations like First and Last Brewery, a microbrewery who are now based in Bellingham. They've just got their new base. And we, again, have an introduction to the wonderful brewing business that they have. We sample a few beers because they use locally foraged, sustainable products. And then we go out on the bat safari and see those kind of plants in situ. So you've got your gorse and you've got your bramble and hawthorn, all of the things that we've just tasted in the beer, the bats are then swarming around eating the insects from. So it kind of makes this connection. But I do just really like beer. That's why we set that one up. But essentially, we're kind of having to work a little bit with the leftovers, aren't we, in wildlife, unfortunately. As Ben's just explained, it's just what's left. You know, moths have faced around a 30% overall decline in Britain since the 60s, which is just outstanding. Most of our birds now are amber or red listed. We're just working with what we've got left. But it doesn't matter. People still absolutely fall in love with these creatures that are often missed out or they've become kind of background noise to us. I missed one. Oh, yeah. So in cities, for example, we work a lot in Newcastle city centre because there's actually incredible wildlife there because we've got those forgotten bits of scrub or shrubland that's still in situ. So we host bat safaris along the quayside and dawn chorus discos because Ousburn, where our office is based, we found a pair of breeding greenfinch in Ousburn. And if you've been there, there's not that much wildlife there. I'm aware someone in the audience lives there. It's absolutely incredible for the green spaces that are left, but it's really important that we maintain them. So what we do now, we do these dawn chorus discos and different events, and we work with the Ousburn Trust to actually try and mimic some of the natural disturbance to bramble, to try and replicate a more round, shrubby-like structure that's better for wildlife and have that succession. And in everything we do, we're trying to cooperate with people because without this cooperation, you can't have restoration. You can't do it yourself. It's brilliant to see so many in the room working together already because that's just absolutely 101. But then we do still have some species that are absolutely mind-blowing, like the osprey. We've got the Kielder ospreys, 7 breeding pairs we've got in the Kielder forest. And we actually undertook some training with Rewilding Europe for ecotourism, essentially. They didn't even think about the moths and the bats. They didn't get mentioned. The moths, the bats, the small mammals, none of those things got mentioned. It was all about the wolves and the bears and the lynx and the cetaceans, which thankfully we do still have. But regardless, we do actually have some of these kind of figurehead species like the osprey that can be used to bring people to the north. I know they're elsewhere, but bring people to the north and celebrate what else we have. So Northumberland Wildlife Trust have an incredible osprey watching viewpoint at Kielder, but there hasn't been an economy built around it. So we're trying to establish the fact that you can have a nature-based economy and enjoyment in the north of England. So we set up osprey watching cruises on Kielder Water twice weekly with Kielder Waterside. So we work in partnership with Northumbrian Water and the Landell group for that. And then because the ospreys bring people in, we run experiences around that, like your bat safaris. We've got sound safaris and family nature ranges and all these different things because people come to see the ospreys and then they stay to see what else there is. I've spoken quite a lot about the northeast, but particularly with somebody in the room, I'd best mention the northwest as well because we work across northern England. So Wild Haweswater, which is managed by the RSPB on United Utilities Water Company's land, they're working in some large landscape scale nature restoration, which is just incredible to see, and you really, really have to go if you haven't already. But because they've been working on that for some time now, we've been able to set up nature-based economy there through some wildlife photography hides. So a big part of what we do is try and encourage ethical wildlife photography because it can lead to some substantial disturbance if photographers get wind of a particular barn owl in a particular area, for example. And it can just lead to all sorts of disturbance. So we try and share the message as much as we can. But with the hides, we've now been able to employ one full-time equivalent member of staff at Haweswater because of the nature restoration that the RSPB and other organisations are doing there, which might not seem like a very big deal, but when you're having to run a business yourself, that's like, woo, really exciting times. So we were very happy about that. And it all feeds back into the restoration of the landscape, what we do, because we're a community interest company, so a not-for-profit. We reinvest back into nature conservation and restoration as much as possible, such as basic things like installing bat boxes. We give a percentage, essentially, to each area that we work with each partner. And we give 5% extra to a charity which may benefit what we do, such as the Penrith and District Red Squirrel Group at Haweswater. So it's really important as well for us that we're not just taking the money and running, basically. It has to be this kind of circular economy, because without reinvesting back into nature, we're not going to have the nature to bring people to come and see, if that makes sense. And yes, in the city as well, we have this incredible creature that gets such a negative reputation, that our Geordie kittiwakes, our seafaring birds that come back to us every year. How privileged are we? What did we ever do to deserve such luck? So what's really exciting for us is it's not just us reinvesting in nature. We've had this kind of like braided channel effect where people have got wind of the species that we're working with, and we've built up this excitement around them. And now other groups want a piece of it as well. They want to actually contribute. Not nature conservation groups, other groups as well. I forgot that picture was in. So the story with this, not just to get your appetite worked up for the cake later, when it comes to kittiwakes, for example, we launched Kittiwakes and Donuts events with Proven Goods Co. If you haven't been to them, again, they use organic, locally sourced produce and all of this. They're absolutely wonderful, small batch bakery. So we set up these Kittiwakes and Donuts events to bring new audiences out, to talk about the realities of living alongside these seabirds that are dubbed as seagulls, or something that I can't say while the camera's running on the Gateshead side, to say just how much of a privilege it is to have them alongside us. After a short while, oh yes, and we work with the Tyne Kittiwake Partnership, Dan Turner, who is just he's the Kittiwake king. We wouldn't have the Kittiwakes if it wasn't for Dan Turner, I'm going to add in. After a short while, a North Shields band called Hector Gannet got in touch and said, well, we're writing songs about the ocean, and the Kittiwakes bring these oceanic songs to the city. If we don't have the Kittiwakes and we don't have this life in the sea, what will our songs be based on? There'll be nothing left. So we hooked up with them, and we hosted our first Tyne Kittiwake celebration gig. So this was a send-off as they were heading off on their migration onto the ocean. We said goodbye, Kittiwakes. We waved them off at the sea. Hector Gannet did a gig, and all of the profits, all of the income actually, we kept, which ended up being about £1,500 to launch this year Tyne Kittiwake Week, which was the first week-long celebration of Kittiwakes hosted in Newcastle. And we really love this, actually. So we engaged as many people as we possibly could in a very last-minute way, as many people as we possibly could who are already working with the Kittiwakes. Because, again, it's not just about celebrating the nature. You have to celebrate the people who are working around it. So, for example, John Miles's wonderful books, Kitty the Toon, Dan Turner from the Kittiwake Partnership. We had lots of organisations like that. And we also brought out some people who are almost myth. If you're on Twitter, Yellow Birder, Kit Jewett, he's never been seen in the flesh. But we managed to encourage him out because he curated this excellent book, Red 67, and he's just launched a new one, Into the Red, that features the kittiwake, a red-listed bird. We managed to lure him out to talk about his journey, again, in establishing and curating that book. Sorry. And we ended up having around 500 people, I believe it was, come and find out more about the Kittiwakes, and all of them were local. So we had kind of a guidebook and a guest book on the Kittiwakes, so people could leave their comments on what the Kittiwakes meant to them. So we're trying to engage with people in a way that's exciting and fresh and fun to actually talk about some quite serious stuff. Because the Kittiwakes do, they can be controversial because just as everything does, they poo on the floor and it leads to a mess and a smell. But unless we're talking about it with each other, that problem is never going to be solved. And this is the world's most inland breeding colony of kittiwakes. How could we possibly lose them on our watch just by not daring to talk about them? And it's not just in the city. So there's another species that I work with. I've already been pointed out as the beaver lady today because of some videos that I do. When it comes to talking about potentially controversial species in the countryside, I actually find it a lot more difficult. It would be interesting knowing what Ben thinks about this, but I find it a lot more difficult because in the city, it belongs to us all. The landscape belongs to us all, whereas in the countryside, it tends to be owned by someone. If a beaver turns up onto a farmer's land and threatens to flood that land, it's his, whereas if it's in the city, it's everybody's. So I do find that the discussions vary substantially, and the responses obviously vary substantially. And it's not the species themselves, it's their impact. Just like the kittiwakes with the poo, it's the beavers with their incredible architecture, which does have obvious impacts occasionally. But as I say, it's really important that we get a little bit braver and we talk about these creatures, because beavers are potentially going to be reintroduced through wild living licenses next year. And in Northumberland, we're quite fortunate, really. We've not had any rogue releases, or none that I'm aware of anyway. We've not had any rogue releases. So before the beavers come, and they absolutely should and must return, we've got this opportunity to talk together and to make plans on how we can live alongside them, where they might be, how we might install flow devices, who's going to be the beaver project officers. We've got this opportunity now to link up, find out who's good at what, and then prepare for their hopeful return. So I was Beaver Project Officer for Cumbria for several years, and it was through lockdown, unfortunately, but I still managed to engage with people online because it's not just face-to-face. We've got all of these incredible online methods now. And when I went recently to Bavaria to study impacts that beavers have there and the relationships that they have on people, this is an incredible valley, actually, where the beavers have restored this wetland in the middle that's just not optimal for farming, and then there's farmland all around it. I asked one of the farmers there in the Farmers Union, what can we do to prepare for the arrival of beavers? And he just said, talk. So I'm kind of going to leave you with that we must talk and not think of them as a taboo subject. There's something really exciting. There's something really serious to be discussed as well, but they must be discussed. And then hopefully one day, if a little girl comes up to me and says, I want you to show me a bear and a wild cat, I could say, well, you're not getting a bear, actually. We're still definitely walking in their footsteps. But we might see beavers and we might hear wild cats, and it's thanks to all of these incredible people. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I first came across Wilding. Sorry? Heather. Useless chairman. Anyway, yes, thank you, Heather. I first came across Kane when he made some films for the North Northumberland Tourism Association, which are still on YouTube, and he did some delightful footage. And I'm sure the kittiwakes were on there. I do a lot of guiding on Hadrian's Wall as a day-to-day job, really. And Americans, they love the kittiwakes when you tell their story. So I always make sure that when we're walking across the Tyne Bridge or up by the Baltic, it says, look, these are kittiwakes. And I describe the things that you've described today. I've never seen a beaver in the wild, I have to say. I hope I see beavers in Northumberland or somewhere nearby before too long. So thank you for that. Lovely photographs. And I just thought your statement about we work with what's left. I thought that was quite telling, really. And I think we need to change that, and through the work of the AONBs and the National Association of AONBs, then perhaps you can begin to begin to change that and increase our biodiversity and wildlife. So Claire is our next speaker. And Claire is director of the National History Society of Northumbria. And she's, as I described earlier on, 25 years working with landowners, with farmers, community groups, schools, and committed individuals. And it is bringing people and wildlife together that she's especially enthusiastic about. The real magic happens then. So Claire, I'm nervous now, I'm getting it wrong. And we look forward to hearing your presentation. I think that's forward and that's back. Okay. Yep.
Forward there?
Yep, back there. Yep. And it's in that direction, so don't point at the screen. So, yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you ever so much, Patrick. Lovely to be here this afternoon, so hello to everybody. I'm Director of Natural History Society of Northumbria, and it's an absolute privileged position to be in. And obviously, the name, you'd think it's all about nature. But in actual fact, I think the reason Ian invited me to talk this afternoon is it's really that combination of bringing people and wildlife together, which is really the kind of the full impact that we have. Just a little bit of introduction as to who I am. I was privileged enough to start as a Heritage Coast warden, as they were, over 25 years ago, working with a lot of different landowners, community groups, interested individuals like yourselves. So I'm feeling quite nostalgic about being in one of these wonderful community forums this afternoon. Did that for a number of years, worked with various local authorities, worked with other AONB teams as well. And then I was on a northerly migration up to Peterborough, where I had the absolute fantastic job to do because I was able to manage 1,700-acre estate. Ben would have loved it because I actually set out landscape principles, which was making everything scruffy. Untidiness ruled. The map up there with the green on it actually was designated areas for untidiness. So we had great fun there, and my team continue that wonderful work to this very day. So then it was about 6 years ago that my northern migration then brought me up to the northeast. My partner was originally from here, and I can see why he was such a fan of the northeast, absolutely cracking area. I've been director of Natural History Society since then, and we're a regional charity. We work across the northeast of England. We have a tiny staff team, so there's 6 of us to cover the whole of the northeast, but we're supported by about 200 volunteers. And I think a wonderful character as well about the Natural History Society of Northumbria is we're a membership organisation, but the number of times I've had conversations with members, often in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, when they tell me how long they've been a member. And I've often been saying, you've been a member longer than I've been alive. And I think it's that passion and the commitment of local people which does just achieve so much. And when I reflect on my really fortunate career within countryside management and conservation of 25 years, to me it's that no one is too small to make a difference, absolutely resonates. And again, that really came true in Ian's initial talk about just how much the AONB has achieved, and then also with Wild Intrigue as well. Just looking then about a little bit of an introduction to the Natural History Society of Northumbria, if you haven't heard of us, it is a mouthful, so from now on I'll say NHSN, if that's okay. So NHSN, we were set up in 1829, which makes us one of the oldest and the largest natural history societies in the country. This is our home. It's the Hancock Museum in Newcastle City Centre. Hopefully some of you may have visited there. Often people have been inspired from visiting there when they were very little, and they get quite misty-eyed when they now say, I now visit with my own grandchildren. So it really does have a fondness for many people's local pride. As well as our early members actually establishing the museum, it opened in 1884 as the Museum of Natural History. And we also own about 500,000 objects of natural history. They can't all fit in that museum, so many are actually stored within the incredible basement of the Discovery Museum in the city centre. And we've really got to thank our early members for setting the culture of NHSN. They were absolutely determined in the 19th century that the society should not be a kind of an elite club where only it was the rich and wealthy could actually experience and be inspired by the natural world. And our early members, they pioneered free access to the museums, and they used to travel down, it would take them days to travel down from Newcastle to London, where they would actually lobby politicians to try and make sure that museums would be freely accessible to everybody throughout the country. And even just back at home in Newcastle, if children couldn't actually come for the free access at the museum, they would actually club together as members and actually take items from our collections out to the orphanages, to the schools for deaf and blind children as well. And I just think it's really interesting when Ian was referring to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, when you do those big bids like Coastlands and you've got loads of guidance to follow, and they're very much about instilling community outreach. And when I rummage around our wonderful artefacts in our archive in the second floor of the Hancock Museum, some of it just reads just like a Heritage Fund outreach guidance. So it's amazing how long this strand, and I think it just shows that it is that community grassroots which really does have that impact. It is so important. Another lovely strand of work that our early members did was holding Saturday morning talks for children. And I wish that I had been a fly on the wall in 1888, because apparently the first of such of these talks attracted 900 attendees, which I'm not sure how they even managed to fit them all in at the museum on that day. So it just goes to show the popularity of what they're doing. My talk now really splits into two parts. This is the first where we talk about celebrating the life of past and current day naturalists. And I use naturalist as a very wide term, and we often like to think that everyone's a naturalist. I defy any child, if you take them outside and show them things, that they're probably not going to be interested in nature. And we haven't quite worked out at what age we actually stop thinking that we are a naturalist. So really for us, it is everybody is or can be a naturalist. Some of our early naturalists have left an amazing legacy. The gentleman on the left-hand side here is John Hancock. So it was him and his brother who were instrumental in building the Hancock Museum, developing the collections there, and quite right that they actually chiselled his name above the doorway of the museum to actually celebrate that. That was actually after he'd sadly died, but very much great to have that legacy captured. Again, in our archives, there's all sorts of wonderful images which represent how some of the original naturalists got together. And obviously, you go back to, the kind of 1830s, 40s and 50s, no mobile phones, no devices, no computers, no photography in some of those years. And I just think the importance of those people making discoveries of actually new species that they were finding at that time, and incredible. It was such hard work for them to get out to some of the remoter areas of the country as well. And the fact that their common interest in the natural world brought them together, and they could actually share those inspirations. And just lovely to actually have some of those early field trips captured in some of the material above. We were well aware about 5 years ago or so that it was often the rich and the famous, and often the gentleman naturalists who we tended to know more about. So what we have been trying to do more recently is dig a bit deeper in the archive to find out, well, who were the other people who actually supported this work? So we did produce a Women's Naturalist of North East England booklet and an exhibition a few years ago as well. Got copies here this afternoon. And that really has further inspired a lot more of our work to be making sure that we are being inclusive and engaging for as many people as possible. I love this picture when we found this in the archive. This was our 100th birthday party that was held in 1929. And they had a bit of a party apparently, but then they decided to take this photograph on the front steps of the Hancock Museum, which is quite an imposing building when you come onto those steps. And I must admit, it was my absolute pleasure and slightly scary responsibility. In 2019, we decided to hold a 190th party. And we thought, we've got to replicate that picture. And I think hopefully it shows to you, as well as being, obviously, the world is in colour now, but the society has grown, and also we've certainly widened our backgrounds and characteristics of our membership and partnership who we're working with as well. We are a membership organisation, as I mentioned, and it really is thanks to all of our membership support. Some of them, as I said, have been members for just decades and decades, but great that we have been gradually increasing our membership year on year on. Our members receive a magazine 3 times a year, and again, that magazine, it's all about the North East. We very much do celebrate the regional and local projects. And it gives us a wonderful opportunity to be able to showcase the work of local naturalists, but also to be able to feature often early career, enthusiastic volunteers and students. And they're so excited to actually get their work in print as well. And they often ask for extra copies to send relatives and everything as well. So it's great to hopefully be able to really support that early career interest. As a kind of learners' society, obviously set up in the 19th century, as I mentioned, one publication which we've been producing since a staggering 1831 is our more scientific journal of the Transaction. And you see the original copy there, just on the top left-hand side. We continue to produce those, and it's been wonderful, thanks to the help of a great ornithologist, Dr. Chris Redfern, some of you may know. He's our key editor, and one of the journals each year is Coastal Wildlife. And that's a wonderful way for us to be able to bring together records across the different coastal sites involving the RSPB, the National Trust and Natural England, to really bring together those records and actually publish them so that they are out there in the public domain. And as we've already touched on this afternoon, sadly it is scary how we are unfortunately capturing the demise of some species, but hopefully just also being able to share that understanding so that we can actually be encouraging nature recovery as well. Within our archive, one of the absolute gems that we've been looking at is the individual nature journals. And we were absolutely thrilled this year. A previous trustee, he had kept the same design of nature journal for 52 years running. Every year he went out and purchased the same style of notebook. And these are some of his books here. He'd sadly passed away, but his family very generously donated his nature journals to our natural history archive. And it's just wonderful that we actually can now bring them out to inspire young children at some of our educational programme. And again, reading some of the records there's a huge amount of information about where are those populations and how they've changed over time. So a really, really valuable resource. So a key kind of call to action for everyone this afternoon is if you know any grannies, aunties, uncles, brothers or sisters who keep any kind of journals or records, please make sure they never declutter their house or their loft. We'd be really, really interested to make sure that that material isn't lost. Another great element to the Society's activities that we've been running, again since 1831, is having a series of talks. And it's just lovely to be able to bring people together and just, again, have a lot of talks which focus on North East nature. We continue these talks. We have 20 talks every winter. And obviously with the pandemic, they were then forced to go online. But the wonderful legacy of that now is that we've got a growing YouTube channel. So I would encourage you to subscribe and watch some of our films on there. I know we've got a few people in the audience who have been featured in those talks as well. So they're absolutely such a wonderful, rich resource for us to have. Obviously, as a Natural History Society, you'd expect us to be interested in the ecological aspects of natural history, but we really do want to make sure that we're capturing the social and cultural aspects as well. As we've all said this afternoon, you know, it's so important. It's people and wildlife, which is the absolute vital ingredient that we need to actually ensure that nature recovers for the future. And one of the elements we've wanted to do is to really start recording some of the amazing stories of some naturalists who work within North East England as well. So have a look on our YouTube channel. There's a series there called Talking Naturally, and we have a series of growing interviews. There's all sorts of just wonderful gems that people have been able to share. But again, it's that intangible, rich heritage which we didn't want to be lost over time. And the keen-sighted amongst you as well. I'm delighted to say that we've got a cracking Talking Naturally on there from previous speaker Heather as well. So please do go and enjoy those. A growing area of our work is a strand of citizen science. So obviously we have a lot of keen members, we're working with partner organisations. And in 2020, we thought, let's really just start piloting a bit of citizen science. So, of course, months in the planning, we launched the North East Bee Hunt in 2020 in February. And obviously then, a month later, we were all sent into our homes. We were incredibly grateful that we had decided to go for bees as our first citizen science project. So at least it meant that while we were all trapped in our gardens and local environments, at least there was a chance that people could actually go out and record bees. And it's thanks to over 400 recorders that we've actually been able to get so many records now of bees. They're traditionally quite an under-recorded group, but obviously very appealing for the public. And the great thing with this is you don't have to be able to identify the bee at all. This year we've actually launched iNaturalist so that even schools we're working with, primary school children, can go out and take photos of bees and send those records in to us. It's thanks to some of those recorders across the region. You can see that we've actually really had quite good coverage within the AONB, and certainly it's discovered that we've had far more species and records occurring for the hairy-flowered bumblebee at the top, and also the hill cuckoo bee is actually really increasing in frequency, particularly along the coast between Harwich and Amble. So it's thanks to those people's records that we're actually being able to understand those populations better and to be able to do more for their conservation. 2 years ago, we launched the North East Ladybird Spot that links up deliberately with the National Recording Scheme for ladybirds. And again, these are incredibly fun species to spot. The great thing is, even on a day like today, if you go to a garden or even go to a cemetery, you'll be able to find ladybirds. And again, it's been lovely that more recorders have actually been quite captured by going out and looking for ladybirds. And certainly some species like this 11-spot ladybird featured here, that was really quite a scarce species, but in actual fact it has been recorded a little bit more thanks to people's efforts over the last year, the ladybird spot. So winter is a particularly good time to go and look for them. So if you're completely full up on Boxing Day, you can always go out and find some ladybirds and send in those records. And as I say, you don't need to be able to identify them, just literally take a picture and send it in. Our latest venture into citizen science was launched earlier on this year, and that was discovering orchids of North East England. Obviously, they're a very enigmatic group of plants, very, very appealing for people, but surprisingly, not much is known about them, of their distribution. So we were really grateful to Chris and Hazel Meserel and the Botanical Society of British Isles for really helping us with this project and get some of the botanists on board. They can be a bit tricky group to identify, and they do hybridise. But again, recorders have really got behind that. The map here just shows the records which we've had in for just one season's worth of this project. And already we are starting to get some good information being revealed. For example, bee orchids, they're actually on a kind of gradual march north across the country, probably due to climate change. Pyramidal orchids, like the one featured on the front cover here, they're actually gradually moving inland as well. But it's thanks to having those records that we can understand what's happening. If you are interested in orchids, do have a look out for our orchids journal. That's being released in about 3 or 4 weeks' time as well. Another great way for us to bring together current day naturalists is our improved facilities at our nature reserve just up at Gosforth, which is about 3 miles north of the city centre. And we're absolutely delighted that we've been able to host a few team away days. I hope that someone in the audience here is featured in that picture as well. So it's just lovely to be able to give various people who work in the sector a great team day out and really be able to kind of just enjoy the space being out in the woodland. And we've had really fantastic feedback about what a lovely improved facility it is there. Again, thanks to the support of various funders and our members to make the Phil Studies Room a dream come true on that one. So I'm just going to move now on to the second part of my talk, which has been a really increasingly growing strand of work for us, and that's about inspiring our future and young naturalists. It's always been part of our history, but I think we probably lost it somewhere along the way, that we weren't actually as active as we probably could and should have been. We did a membership survey in 2018, and one of the top priorities of our members was to be making sure that we were doing far more to actually be encouraging younger individuals. And I think what's been so inspiring for us is just the enthusiasm. It really does feel like a kind of snowball running downhill fast sometimes, because the more that we do for children, it just feels as though it's not just the children who are benefiting, but the number of adults who go away like big kids themselves, who really, really do feel inspired. And it's just getting families outside to really experience all of that wonder. Gosforth Nature Reserve is a really high-quality habitat. So even though it is 3 miles north of the city centre, it's increasingly getting urbanised, but it's got great reed bed, wetland habitats, woodland, both deciduous and coniferous. So it offers a great range of habitats within a small area, which is absolutely ideal for educational groups. Even since the 1950s, we've been holding open days at the Nature Reserve. And again, we have some wonderful material in our archive about posters about welcoming families with homemade lemonade and ginger cake in the 50s over to the Nature Reserve. So we've really tried to keep that lovely spirit, keeping it focused about nature activities. We're always grateful to our huge army of volunteers and partners who come and help and run a fantastic array of activities for those open days. But we're hoping that that experience really does just kind of inspire people to maybe follow careers or a lifelong interest in nature. This year, we were really delighted to receive funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to do a 9-month pilot project called A Young North East Naturalist. And this was really inspired by focus groups that we had with parents and teachers. And the consistent message that kept on coming back to us was, I can get lots of material about the Amazonian rainforest, but how do I find out about local wildlife? What's special about northeast wildlife? And where do I go for local wildlife? So we thought, let's try and tackle this. So thanks to the help with that funding, we were able to employ 2 nature rangers, Julie and Jack, and they went out into 5 primary schools. They were deliberately selected for being schools who didn't have a track record of taking children outside. And so the teachers there were happy to share that they really found that quite a scary prospect. And effectively, we based it a lot on solid national research, that if you have 10 touch points for children, in actual fact, that can be a life-changing experience for them. And that hopefully it will gain that habit that they will continue then and take that habit home and take their families outside as well. Inspired again by some of the material in our archives of some of our history of inviting children into the museum, we thought we should really weave the Hancock Museum into that project somehow. So we launched the project there, And also, as a special event for the end of them, for the project, we invited all 200 children back into the museum. We gave them a wonderful end-of-project celebration. And I must admit, some of us adults, we did have tears in our eyes because it was just incredibly moving. Some of the children had made videos, they spoke. The chair of our trustees, we did a mini graduation ceremony for which every child received I'm now a Young North East Naturalist certificate as well. And it was just a really, really incredibly moving experience. The whole project's been evaluated by Newcastle University Centre for Teaching and Learning, so we are hoping to be able to build on that in the future. But it's just been really such a fantastic experience. Lovely. Okay. Thank you. Do we have sound on this? No, I'll improvise. That's fine. Another key strand of our work has also not just working with school children, but obviously we're based on campus. We have Northumbria and Newcastle University very close to us, and we also have links with Durham University. And when we were having our talks a couple of years ago, we thought, well, it's great to have our main natural history talks, but in actual fact, a lot of the speakers are more elderly, kind of more experienced. How can we actually kind of make sure that we're supporting early career naturalists? So we thought we'd pilot an idea called the 1829 Talks. Called 1829, firstly, to celebrate the year that we were founded, but secondly, because we start them just like a support act at a musical concert, just before the main concert, just before 6:30 in the evening on our winter talks. And I must admit, some of these young students, they have absolutely been incredible. Dare I say it, sometimes they might even surpass the main speakers. And I think what has been just incredible was we've been able to give them the opportunity to showcase their work, which sometimes when you're a PhD student and your bubble might be quite small on campus, to then be kind of like put on Zoom or given a big auditorium and to talk to real live members of the public who don't actually come from academia is really quite a scary experience for them. But they've really risen to the challenge. And I think these 1829 talks, they've really showcased just the amazing amount of research which is being done locally that is often quite hidden when you actually walk around a campus. You just don't realise all of the topics that are being worked upon. But the other lovely element that we've been able to incorporate as well is for people within the conservation sector. So again, they don't often get a chance to showcase their work. So this Monday, for example, we had someone from the Environment Agency who's doing research about pearl mussels on the River Tyne. So it covers all sorts of topics, but just a really wonderful opportunity for us to be able to support early career naturalists. This is just Eleanor here, who was chatting about her agroforestry in Northumberland. Again, Ben would like that because that was, again, an element about not having green and tidy countryside and how we should be making stuff a bit more scruffy. All of our educational programme, it really couldn't happen whether or not it's at the Nature Reserve or out and about without our key educational volunteer rangers. Some of them are retired teachers, some of them are people who are interested in actually getting into teaching or into conservation. But we've had a real magic element this summer whereby we've had links with Northumbria University, and really excitingly, the lady who organises their BA for primary school teaching, she discovered us, and she's been bringing this whole cohort of trainee primary school teachers to the Nature Reserve. You should see them pond dipping. It's just as well there's no children there, because I think all the trainee teachers would actually elbow them out of the way. It's just been wonderful to actually build up their confidence of being outside in the natural environment, but also their enthusiasm for what they're discovering as well. So again, just a wonderful kind of synergy of people with different interests coming together. And just lovely that our volunteers as well do just love to kind of share that experience, and they're volunteering for us, but they're getting a lot out of it as well. And I think for me, again, another special characteristic of Natural History Society Northumbria is that intergenerational learning, just by bringing people together. It's not just a question of the young learning from the old. It really is that coming together of so many people from different backgrounds, different interests and characteristics, and really being able to kind of like build all of our enthusiasm and inspiration from each other. Another key strand of our work historically was this community outreach. And a couple of years ago, we thought, okay, how do we continue to do that outreach? And we were really aware, through talking to some of the children's charities in town, that for many children, particularly in the West End of town, they would never have heard of anywhere like Sea Houses. They have never been out of the city. Their opportunities to connect with nature are really, really limited. So we piloted what we call our Lantern Fund. It was called Lantern, inspired by some of the candlelit lectures which we used to hold for children in the museum in the 19th century. And again, thanks to our members' support on Lantern Fund appeals and various funders, we were able to do field trips for these groups of children to actually really expand their horizons out to places like Kielder, over to the Farne Islands. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, obviously, we couldn't do field trips any longer. So in discussion with the children's charities, we've developed some nature activity bags. And the concept there is just all in one nice cotton tote bag, is you've got all sorts of goodies that a child, whether or not they're in a rural area or in an urban area, they can just pick that up and actually just, with very little help from a parent or a teacher, actually go outside and start discovering nature for themselves. And I'm absolutely delighted. This year, we've been working with eight charities, and we've actually distributed 660 nature activity bags to different children as well. We've been having requests from members that they'd like to be able to purchase them. So particularly before Christmas now, we have actually bought some here this afternoon as well. So if you did fancy doing easy Christmas shopping, please come and see us at the end. It would be absolutely remiss of me, not as a membership organisation, to give you a little bit of commercial break before your tea and cake. So we obviously couldn't do this work without our members. So all sorts of different membership benefits. But if you've liked some of the sound of what we're achieving in the North East and you feel that you'd like to support our cause, please do think about either joining yourself or buying gift membership for someone else at Christmas time. And as I said, just a huge, huge thank you, because it's our members, it's our volunteers, and all of our funding partners that make all of this happen. I stand up here as a very proud and privileged director of Natural History Society Northumbria, but I feel as though really I've got several thousand people behind